As we gently open the pages of history tonight, we find ourselves drifting into the heart of a vast empire, one that stretched across 3 continents, one that left its imprint on art, law, architecture, and the daily rhythms of millions of lives. This is the story of Suleiman the Magnificent and the Ottoman Empire. It is a story told not with urgency, but with quiet patience, as though unfolding in candlelight. We will move through centuries of human endeavor, allowing the soft current of time to guide us, resting in the calm assurance that history always continues its slow march, whether we are awake or dreaming. The Ottoman Empire, at its height, became one of the most enduring and influential empires in the world. Founded at the edge of the 13th century, it grew from a frontier principality in Anatolia into a mighty dominion spanning the Balkans, the Middle East, and North Africa. At the center of its story stands Suleiman I, remembered in the West as the Magnificent, and in his own realm as Kanuni, the Lawgiver. His reign, beginning in 1520 and lasting for nearly half a century, represented the golden age of Ottoman power, prosperity, and cultural brilliance. To begin understanding the world of Suleiman, we must picture the empire he inherited. The Ottomans emerged from the fragmented landscape that followed the decline of the Seljuk Turks and the weakening of Byzantine authority in Asia Minor. Small Turkish principalities, called beyliks, carved out territories, but one of these, led by Osman, whose name gave rise to the dynasty, would gradually eclipse all the others. By the early 15th century, the Ottomans had established themselves as a formidable force, capturing Constantinople in 1453 under Sultan Mehmed II. That single event transformed the old Byzantine capital into the Ottoman seat, Istanbul, a city of minarets, domes, and bustling markets. By Suleiman's birth in 1494, the empire had already laid down strong roots that would nourish his later ambitions. Suleiman grew up within this vibrant world of conquest and cultural synthesis. The Ottomans were not merely warriors. They were also administrators, architects, and patrons of the arts. The empire functioned as a bridge between East and West, uniting Arab, Turkish, Persian, and European traditions. The call to prayer echoed across cities, while caravan routes brought silks, spices, and knowledge into its lands. At the same time, the system of government known as the millet allowed religious communities, Christians, Jews, and Muslims, to live according to their own laws and customs, weaving together a diverse social fabric. As we drift deeper into the 16th century, we find Suleiman ascending to the throne after the death of his father, Selim I. Selim had earned the epithet the Grim for his severity, but also for his remarkable conquests, including Egypt and the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. His reign expanded Ottoman prestige, yet it was Suleiman who would take these foundations and build upon them, creating an empire admired by friends and feared by rivals. Suleiman would lead campaigns into Europe, stretching the Ottoman presence toward Vienna. He would oversee the codification of laws that balanced justice with imperial power. He would commission mosques and palaces that still crown Istanbul's skyline. And yet, his life was not only about grandeur. Within the walls of Topkapi Palace, his private world was shaped by poetry, by deep friendships, and by the influence of one woman in particular, Hurrem Sultan, known in Europe as Roxolana. Their partnership altered the course of Ottoman dynastic traditions and reshaped the politics of the harem, the inner household of the Sultan. The story of Suleiman and his empire is one of contrasts, between conquest and contemplation, between rigid authority and fluid diversity, between the march of armies and the stillness of courtyards shaded by cypress trees. It is a story of power and fragility, for even as the empire expanded, it sowed the seeds of future struggles. Yet in our telling, we move without hurry, acknowledging each layer of history as though it were a brushstroke on a great canvas. Over the course of this journey, we will trace the origins of the Ottoman state, its transformation under Suleiman's rule, and the legacies that endure long after his time. We will pause to consider the daily lives of ordinary subjects, the architecture that lifted eyes heavenward, the systems of law that governed markets and marriages, and the cultural expressions that gave the empire its distinctive voice. Each chapter will move gently into the next, like the quiet lapping of waves along the Bosporus, ensuring that as you listen, you can drift seamlessly between waking and dreaming. Suleiman's reign coincided with momentous changes elsewhere in the world. The Renaissance flowering in Europe, the voyages of discovery across oceans, the Reformation reshaping Christianity. Yet within the Ottoman domains, a different kind of flowering occurred. Poetry was recited in gardens perfumed with roses. Scholars debated questions of philosophy and faith in madrasas. Artisans crafted ceramics, calligraphy, and textiles whose beauty was renowned far beyond the empire's borders. The Ottomans were deeply engaged with the wider world, and Suleiman himself corresponded with rulers as distant as Francis I of France, forging alliances that reveal the interconnectedness of early modern politics. As we prepare to wander through the chapters of Suleiman's life and reign, let us allow our minds to soften into the rhythm of history. We are not racing toward conclusions. We are resting in the unfolding of time. Picture the domes of Istanbul illuminated at dusk, the call to prayer rising in the air, the silhouettes of ships moving quietly along the Golden Horn. This is the world into which Suleiman was born, and this is the world we will now explore together. May this story, gently told, accompany you into the peaceful landscapes of sleep. And as we move from chapter to chapter, may the calm cadence of history carry you into rest, even as the lessons of the past linger softly in your dreams. The story of Suleiman the Magnificent begins not with his own reign, but with the roots that nourish the dynasty he would one day inherit. To understand his world, we must drift back through the centuries, to the rugged landscapes of Anatolia in the late 13th century. It is here, on the shifting frontier between the crumbling Byzantine Empire and the diverse Turkish principalities, that the Ottomans first emerge. The region was fragmented, a patchwork of small beyliks, local Turkish principalities, that had arisen after the decline of Seljuk power. Among these, one clan, led by Osman, distinguished itself. Osman, from whom the Ottomans would derive their dynastic name, established a principality that thrived by balancing martial vigor with pragmatic alliances. His warriors, known as Ghazis, combined religious zeal with ambitions of conquest, and their campaigns against Byzantine territories slowly expanded their influence. This combination of faith and pragmatism became a hallmark of Ottoman expansion, blending the ideals of holy war with practical state building. Over time, the Ottomans consolidated power by seizing control of key trade routes and fertile lands. Their frontier position allowed them to attract diverse groups, Turks, Greeks, Slavs, and others, into their orbit. Unlike many other powers of the age, the Ottomans proved remarkably adaptable. They absorbed the traditions of conquered peoples, allowing Christian and Jewish communities to live under their own laws through the millet system. This not only stabilized their rule, but also created a mosaic of cultural influences that enriched Ottoman society. A pivotal moment in the early history of the Ottomans came with the capture of Bursa in 1326. Bursa became their first major capital, a center of administration and commerce. The city reflected the Ottomans' early inclination toward architectural patronage, with mosques, markets, and caravanserais, roadside inns for traveling merchants, constructed to serve both the spiritual and material needs of the people. These early steps revealed an empire intent not only on conquest, but also on the creation of enduring institutions. The dynasty's trajectory accelerated under Murad I and Bayezid I, who pushed Ottoman power deep into the Balkans. The Battle of Kosovo in 1389 secured their influence in southeastern Europe, though it also marked the death of Sultan Murad I in combat. Such episodes remind us that Ottoman history was never a smooth ascent, but rather a series of expansions tempered by setbacks. Bayezid I, for instance, suffered a devastating defeat against the Central Asian conqueror Timur in 1402 at the Battle of Ankara. The empire fractured in the aftermath, entering what is known as the Ottoman Interregnum, a period of civil strife among Bayezid's sons. Yet the Ottomans endured, a testament to their resilience. By the mid-15th century, under the leadership of Mehmed II, they achieved one of the most defining victories in world history, the conquest of Constantinople in 1453. This event transformed not only the Ottoman state, but also the course of global history. Constantinople, the fabled city that had stood for over a millennium as the capital of the Byzantine Empire, became the new Ottoman capital, renamed Istanbul. Its fall marked the end of the medieval world for many Europeans, and the dawn of a new age dominated by Ottoman power. Mehmed II, often called the Conqueror, fortified Istanbul with grand walls, bridges, and the magnificent Topkapi Palace, which would become the heart of Ottoman governance for centuries. The Hagia Sophia, once a great Byzantine cathedral, was transformed into a mosque, symbolizing both continuity and change. Under Mehmed, the empire's administration took clearer form, blending Turkish, Persian, and Byzantine traditions. The Ottomans now stood as an empire in every sense of the word, cosmopolitan, powerful, and strategically placed between East and West. By the time Suleiman was born in 1494, the empire had grown into a vast dominion stretching across the Balkans, Anatolia, and the Middle East. His grandfather, Bayezid II, had presided over a period of consolidation, while his father, Selim, stern, ambitious, and ruthless, expanded Ottoman territory further into the Arab world. Selim's victories over the Mamluks brought Syria, Egypt, and the holy cities of Mecca and Medina under Ottoman authority, cementing the dynasty's role as the foremost Muslim power. This gave the Ottomans not only political legitimacy, but also spiritual prestige across the Islamic world. It is in this context that we must situate Suleiman's story. He inherited not a fragile state, but an empire with deep foundations. The institutions, military structures, and cultural frameworks established in the preceding centuries gave him a stage upon which to project his vision. The Ottoman Janissaries, an elite corps of infantry soldiers originally formed from Christian youths recruited through the Devshirme system, stood as both a symbol of discipline and a pillar of military might. The administrative system, built around viziers and provincial governors, allowed for efficient governance over distant provinces. Yet what truly distinguished the Ottomans in their origins was their ability to weave together disparate cultures and traditions. In the streets of Bursa, Edirne, and later Istanbul, one could hear a blend of languages, witness markets bustling with goods from Asia and Europe, and see artisans crafting works influenced by Persian, Arab, and Byzantine motifs. The Ottomans were never isolated. They thrived on exchange. As we rest in this early chapter of the empire's history, we see the gradual shaping of the conditions that would one day allow Suleiman to become the lawgiver and the magnificent. His story, while extraordinary, was only possible because of the foundations laid by generations before him. The frontiersmen who rode under Osman, the conquerors who crossed into the Balkans, the visionaries who captured Constantinople, all of them contributed to the empire's rise. Their legacy created the stage upon which Suleiman would play his part, a stage vast and enduring, set against the backdrop of a world in transition from medieval to early modern. And so, as we close this first section, we pause with a vision of Istanbul, its domes gleaming in the sun, its markets humming with life, and its people diverse and resilient. The empire is poised on the edge of its golden age, awaiting the arrival of the young prince who will soon shape its destiny. The rise of Suleiman is a tale of preparation, inheritance, and the shaping of a ruler who would come to embody the height of Ottoman grandeur. To understand his ascent, we must picture the palace world into which he was born, and the currents of politics, culture, and family that defined his early years. Suleiman entered the world in 1494, in the town of Trabzon on the Black Sea coast. At the time, Trabzon was a frontier region, far from the center of power in Istanbul. His father, Selim, governed the area as a provincial ruler before eventually becoming sultan. The young Suleiman grew up not in the gilded heart of the empire, but in a provincial court where the responsibilities of governance and the realities of military defense were part of daily life. This upbringing gave him a sense of both the fragility and the resilience required to hold power. His education began early and was steeped in the Ottoman tradition of preparing princes for rule. Tutors guided him through studies of theology, law, poetry, and languages. He learned Arabic and Persian in addition to his native Turkish, allowing him to access the rich traditions of Islamic scholarship and Persian literature. Greek and Latin ideas filtered into his education as well, for the Ottomans valued exposure to the diverse intellectual currents that flowed into their empire. Suleiman was not only instructed in governance and philosophy, but also in the arts of poetry and calligraphy. Even as a boy, he began composing verses, revealing the sensitivity and reflective nature that would mark him as more than a mere warrior king. From his earliest years, Suleiman was aware of the weight of dynastic expectations. Ottoman princes were not raised in isolation. They were assigned administrative posts in the provinces to learn the practice of rule. As a teenager, Suleiman served as governor of several districts, including Kaffa in Crimea and Manisa in western Anatolia. These experiences offered him first-hand knowledge of how to manage diverse populations, balance local customs with imperial laws, and respond to crises. In Manisa, especially, he was close enough to Istanbul to remain visible to the capital's court, yet distant enough to develop his own administrative style. The environment of the Ottoman dynasty was often precarious for young princes. Succession was not determined by primogeniture, as in many European monarchies. Instead, the principle of survival of the fittest applied, often leading to rivalry and even violent conflict among brothers. Suleiman grew up with the awareness that his path to the throne would not be guaranteed by birthright alone, but by his ability to command loyalty, demonstrate competence, and survive the machinations of palace politics. In 1512, Suleiman's father Selim seized the throne after a turbulent conflict with his own father, Bayezid II, and his brothers. Selim was ruthless in securing power, earning the nickname the Grim. For the young Suleiman, his father's rise was both a lesson and a warning. Strength was necessary, but it often came at great personal cost. Selim's reign transformed the Ottoman state into the unrivaled center of the Muslim world. Through his campaigns, he brought Syria, Egypt, and the holy cities into Ottoman hands. He also claimed the title of Caliph, presenting himself as the spiritual leader of Sunni Islam. During these years, Suleiman observed not only his father's conquests, but also the administrative structures required to sustain such vast gains. He saw how the Janissaries, the elite military corps, became a decisive political force, and how the empire relied on both military and bureaucratic strength. He also witnessed the cultural and religious integration that came with ruling newly acquired territories, how Cairo and Damascus, with their centuries-old traditions, were incorporated into the Ottoman fold. By the time Selim died in 1520, Suleiman was 26 years old. Unlike many other successions in Ottoman history, his ascension to the throne was relatively smooth. He was the only surviving son, sparing the empire the bloody fratricidal conflicts that had plagued earlier generations. The Janissaries, ever critical in the transfer of power, pledged their support. The empire, already vast and wealthy, awaited his direction. Suleiman's coronation marked a turning point not only in his own life, but in the destiny of the empire. He was young, well-educated, and deeply conscious of the traditions he inherited. His subjects and his court did not yet know that his reign would be remembered as the empire's golden age. They knew him as a prince prepared, but untested on the grandest stage. In these early days as sultan, Suleiman demonstrated qualities that would define his rule: decisiveness, curiosity, and a sense of justice. He moved swiftly to secure his position, rewarding the Janissaries and consolidating his authority. He also began to articulate his vision of rule, one that combined the martial prowess of his forebears with a commitment to law and cultural patronage. He was aware that power could not be sustained by force alone. It required legitimacy, wisdom, and balance. We can imagine him in the courtyards of Topkapi Palace, walking among the cypress trees, contemplating the empire now entrusted to him. The Bosporus shimmered beyond the palace walls, linking the Black Sea to the Mediterranean, symbolizing the empire's place at the crossroads of the world. The responsibilities of leadership pressed upon him, yet he carried them with a calm determination. As we reflect on this stage of Suleiman's life, we see not yet the conqueror, not yet the lawgiver, but the young man poised between inheritance and destiny. His rise was shaped by family, by education, and by the empire's traditions. The seeds planted in his youth, in literature, in administration, in the lessons of survival, would blossom into the qualities that made him both magnificent and remembered as a just ruler. This moment, the rise of Suleiman, is like the quiet dawn before the sun climbs high. The empire, already strong, now awaited the brilliance of a ruler who would expand its horizons, refine its laws, and leave behind a legacy etched into stone and memory. In this stillness, as we close our eyes, we sense the anticipation of what is yet to come, the calm before the Golden Age begins to unfold. When Suleiman ascended the throne in 1520, he inherited not only an empire of vast territories, but also a legacy of military ambition. His first years as Sultan would reveal that he intended not merely to preserve the Ottoman frontiers, but to expand them boldly into the heart of Europe. These campaigns in Europe would define much of his reputation in the West, establishing the Ottomans as a formidable power and Suleiman as a ruler both admired and feared. The early focus of his military endeavors was Hungary, a kingdom whose lands lay at the crossroads between Ottoman dominions in the Balkans and the coveted lands of Central Europe. Hungary at the time was politically fragile. Its nobility was divided, its defenses poorly coordinated, and its monarch, Louis II, young and inexperienced. For Suleiman, Hungary represented both a strategic opportunity and a symbolic prize. For victory, there would extend Ottoman influence deep into Christian Europe and reinforce his stature as the preeminent sovereign of the age. In 1521, just a year into his reign, Suleiman launched his first major campaign against Belgrade, a fortress city that guarded the gateway into Hungary. Belgrade had long been a thorn in the side of Ottoman expansion, resisting earlier assaults even under the formidable Mehmed II. This time, however, Suleiman brought overwhelming force and strategic determination. After a carefully orchestrated siege, Belgrade fell to the Ottomans. Its capture marked an early triumph that signaled both to his subjects and to his European rivals that Suleiman was a ruler of action, prepared to wield the sword as well as the pen. From Belgrade, Suleiman turned his attention further into Hungary. In 1526, he launched one of the most famous campaigns of his reign, the March to Mohacs. The Hungarian forces, though brave, were woefully outnumbered and outmaneuvered. On the fields near the town of Mohacs, the Ottoman army delivered a crushing defeat. King Louis II himself perished in the chaos, reportedly drowning as he attempted to flee the battlefield. The battle was short, decisive, and devastating for Hungary. It opened the door for the Ottomans to assert dominance over much of the kingdom, though the struggle for complete control would continue for decades. The victory at Mohacs resounded across Europe. To many Christian states, it confirmed their worst fears. The Ottomans were advancing inexorably westward. To Suleiman's subjects, it was a moment of immense pride. Yet the conquest was not only about martial glory. It demonstrated the effectiveness of the Ottoman military system, with its disciplined janissaries, its cavalry, and its formidable artillery. The empire's ability to project power so far from its heartland reinforced Suleiman's position as a sovereign with near unmatched reach. Following Mohacs, Suleiman's ambitions carried him further still. In 1529, he set his sights on Vienna, the capital of the Habsburg dynasty. A successful conquest of Vienna would have given the Ottomans a commanding position in Central Europe, perhaps altering the course of European history in ways we can only imagine. Suleiman led a vast army to the city, but this time circumstances conspired against him. The weather was harsh, the supply lines stretched thin, and the defenders resilient. The siege of Vienna ended in withdrawal, a reminder that even the mightiest armies face limits. Though Vienna remained unconquered, the attempt itself sent shockwaves across Europe. The image of Ottoman banners fluttering before the walls of Vienna lingered in European memory as a potent symbol of the empire's reach. It would be recalled for centuries as the moment when Christendom seemed most imperiled. For the Ottomans, the retreat was not seen as catastrophic, but rather as a demonstration of their willingness to test the boundaries of their strength. Throughout these campaigns, Suleiman was not a distant ruler directing battles from afar. He often led his forces personally, sharing the hardships of the march, the uncertainties of weather, and the tension of the siege. His presence inspired loyalty and awe among his soldiers. It also reinforced his image as both sovereign and warrior, embodying the classical ideal of the ruler who commands respect through action as well as authority. The European campaigns also reshaped diplomacy. In the wake of Mohacs, Suleiman cultivated an alliance with Francis I of France, who sought Ottoman support against the Habsburgs. This Franco-Ottoman alliance, though unusual for the time, illustrates how European rulers recognized the necessity of engaging with Suleiman as a peer. The Ottoman Sultan was no longer a distant Eastern monarch, but a central figure in the balance of European politics. Yet it is important to remember that these conquests were not experienced solely in the halls of power. For the people of Hungary and the Balkans, Ottoman expansion meant new rulers, new systems of taxation, and the imposition of new laws. Some communities resisted fiercely, while others found ways to adapt within the Ottoman framework. Markets continued to bustle, churches still rang with bells, and mosques were built alongside them. The empire, though forged in conquest, often sustained its control by accommodating the diversity of its subjects. As we drift through this chapter of Suleiman's reign, we see the outlines of a pattern. Ambition tempered by circumstance, triumph mingled with limitation. The march of armies created both glory and anxiety, both for those who followed the Sultan's banners and for those who watched from across Europe's frontiers. These campaigns etched Suleiman's name into European memory, ensuring that he would be remembered not only as the magnificent, but also as the Sultan who stood before Vienna's gates. And so, as we let this section settle, we imagine the long marches across plains, the glow of campfires at night, the quiet resolve of soldiers awaiting the dawn. The story of Suleiman's campaigns in Europe is not only one of battles, but of the empire's restless drive to test its strength against distant horizons. It is the story of ambition pushing westward, and of the enduring echo of hoofbeats and drumbeats across the fields of history. As we drift further into the 16th century, we see Suleiman's gaze turn eastward, away from the contested plains of Hungary and the fortifications of Vienna, and toward the older, more enduring rivalries of the Middle East. The Ottomans, positioned at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, could never ignore the shifting balance of power to their east. Here, the Persian Safavid Empire stood as both a political rival and a religious counterpart, offering Suleiman a different kind of challenge. His campaigns in the east were not only about territory, but also about faith, legitimacy, and control of sacred and strategic lands. The Safavid dynasty, based in Persia, had risen to prominence under Shah Ismail I in the early 16th century. While the Ottomans were Sunni Muslims, the Safavids adhered to Shia Islam, and the tension between these two branches of the faith deepened their political rivalry. The conflict was not merely theological. It was deeply entwined with questions of authority and survival. Both empires sought to claim leadership of the Muslim world, each presenting itself as the true guardian of the faith. In 1534, Suleiman launched his first major campaign into Safavid territory. The route carried his forces across the rugged terrain of eastern Anatolia, through high mountains and barren plateaus. Unlike the fertile plains of Hungary, this was a world of harsh climates and long, grueling marches. Yet Suleiman pressed forward, determined to secure Ottoman influence over contested borderlands and weaken the Safavid challenge. His armies advanced into Mesopotamia, capturing Baghdad, the historic city that had once been the capital of the Abbasid caliphs. The conquest of Baghdad carried immense symbolic weight. It connected the Ottomans to the golden legacy of the early Islamic Caliphate, strengthening Suleiman's claim to spiritual leadership. Baghdad itself became a jewel within the empire, a city of mosques, markets, and libraries. By integrating it into the Ottoman realm, Suleiman not only gained territory, but also cultural prestige, anchoring his authority in the long continuum of Islamic history. The campaign against the Safavids was not confined to Mesopotamia. In subsequent years, Ottoman and Safavid forces clashed repeatedly across the borderlands of Anatolia and the Caucasus. These wars were often indecisive, marked more by attrition and maneuver than by the clear victories Suleiman had enjoyed in Europe. Yet they reinforced the long-standing division between the Ottoman and Safavid spheres, a division that would shape the political and religious map of the Middle East for centuries to come. Beyond Persia, Suleiman's attention also turned southward to the Arabian Peninsula. His father, Selim I, had already brought the holy cities of Mecca and Medina under Ottoman control, a conquest that gave the dynasty guardianship over Islam's most sacred sites. Suleiman reinforced this role, ensuring that pilgrims traveling the Hajj routes were protected and supported. Caravans bearing thousands of faithful traveled across deserts under the watchful care of Ottoman soldiers and officials. In this way, the empire not only expanded geographically, but also deepened its religious legitimacy. Further east still, the Ottomans sought to secure their influence in the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean. European powers, particularly the Portuguese, had begun to project naval power into these waters, threatening traditional trade routes that carried spices and textiles from Asia to the Mediterranean. Suleiman understood that protecting these routes was vital to the empire's prosperity. Ottoman fleets sailed from Basra and Yemen, challenging Portuguese positions along the Arabian coast and at key ports. While the Ottomans never fully displaced European rivals in the Indian Ocean, their presence ensured that the empire remained engaged in global maritime struggles. The Eastern campaigns were not only about war, they also brought new peoples and traditions into closer contact with the Ottoman world. Baghdad, Damascus, and Cairo became vital centers of culture, scholarship, and trade within the empire. The absorption of these lands enriched the Ottoman treasury, diversified its population, and broadened its intellectual horizons. Scholars from Persia, merchants from Arabia, and pilgrims from across the Islamic world all flowed into Ottoman domains, reinforcing its position as a global hub. Yet these eastern ventures also revealed the limits of Ottoman power. The Safavids proved resilient, capable of retreating into their mountainous heartlands and regrouping after Ottoman advances. The vast distances and harsh terrains stretched supply lines and tested the stamina of soldiers. Victories were often followed by years of stalemate, and treaties rarely produced lasting peace. The struggle between Ottoman and Safavid remained one of endurance, a contest less about decisive conquest than about asserting dominance over contested frontiers. Still, the symbolic gains were immense. By taking Baghdad and securing Mesopotamia, Suleiman bound the empire to the spiritual and historical heart of Islam. By protecting Mecca and Medina, he reinforced the dynasty's image as the guardians of the faith. By engaging in the waters of the Persian Gulf, he signaled that the Ottoman horizon extended far beyond its heartlands. As we rest in this part of the story, we can picture the shifting landscapes, the dusty caravan routes leading to Mecca, the bustling bazaars of Baghdad, the rugged mountains marking the Safavid borderlands. Each image reminds us that the empire was not confined to one region, but spread across varied worlds, each contributing to its richness. In these campaigns to the east, Suleiman showed that his vision was not limited to Europe. His empire sought to balance its western ambitions with its eastern responsibilities, asserting both political might and spiritual guardianship. The Ottoman state under his hand became not only an empire of soldiers and administrators, but also of pilgrims, poets, and merchants. And so, as we drift toward the close of this chapter, we leave Suleiman standing at the crossroads of continents, his armies encamped along rivers and deserts, his banners fluttering in lands both old and new. The East, with its deep histories and sacred places, became a vital part of his legacy, ensuring that his reign would be remembered not only in the palaces of Istanbul, but in the very heart of the Islamic world. As Suleiman secured his empire's frontiers in both Europe and the East, he also turned inward, recognizing that conquest alone could not sustain such a vast dominion. An empire stretched across 3 continents required not just soldiers, but laws, not just victories, but systems to bind its many peoples together. It is for this reason that Suleiman is remembered not only as the Magnificent, admired for his splendor, but also as Kanuni, the Lawgiver, celebrated for his reforms and codification of justice. The Ottoman state had always rested upon a blend of traditions. From its earliest days, it incorporated Islamic law, known as Sharia, with customary practices drawn from Turkish, Persian, and Byzantine legacies. Over the centuries, this produced a patchwork of rulings and practices, often inconsistent across provinces. Suleiman understood that for the empire to function smoothly, its laws must be clarified, organized, and balanced. His vision was not to invent new principles from nothing, but to weave together what already existed into a coherent and accessible system. He commissioned jurists and scholars to undertake the task of codifying laws. This effort produced a body of regulations known as the Kanun, or secular law, which operated alongside Sharia. While Sharia governed religious matters, family life, and ritual, Kanun addressed issues of administration, taxation, land tenure, and criminal justice. By distinguishing between these domains, Suleiman created a balance that both honored Islamic tradition and served the practical needs of governance. One of the most significant aspects of his reforms concerned land ownership and taxation. The Ottoman economy relied heavily on agriculture, and the system of land tenure shaped the livelihoods of peasants and the revenues of the state. Under Suleiman's reforms, land remained officially owned by the Sultan, but was distributed to soldiers and officials in return for service. This ensured loyalty from the military class, while also preventing the unchecked rise of independent feudal lords. Taxes were standardized, reducing arbitrary exactions and providing greater predictability for farmers. For the ordinary subject tilling fields in Anatolia or the Balkans, these reforms brought a measure of stability, even if life remained arduous. Justice was another central theme. Suleiman was deeply concerned with the image of fairness, and many stories portray him as a ruler attentive to the grievances of his subjects. Tales circulate of the Sultan walking in disguise among his people, listening to their complaints and ensuring that justice was done. While such accounts may have grown in the retelling, they reflect a broader truth. Suleiman cultivated the image of a sovereign who embodied justice, an ideal central to Islamic and Ottoman political thought. The Sultan was not merely a conqueror. He was the guardian of order, tasked with protecting the weak and restraining the powerful. The codification of laws also extended to commerce and trade, vital arteries of the empire's wealth. Regulations were established for market practices, weights and measures, and the operation of guilds. These rules not only facilitated fair exchange, but also fostered the trust necessary for trade to flourish across long distances. Merchants could travel with greater confidence from Cairo to Istanbul, from Damascus to Belgrade, knowing that the law provided a framework of stability. Suleiman's reforms also touched upon the organization of the legal profession itself. Judges, known as qadis, were appointed throughout the empire to oversee both Sharia and Qanun. Their role was crucial in maintaining consistency, ensuring that imperial laws were applied even in distant provinces. The hierarchy of officials, from local judges to the Grand Vizier in the capital, created a chain of authority that reinforced the Sultan's presence in every corner of the empire. These efforts did not eliminate all injustice, nor did they erase the inequalities inherent in a hierarchical society, yet they gave the empire a coherence that allowed it to endure for centuries. Suleiman's laws were not abandoned at his death. They became part of the enduring framework of Ottoman governance, cited and respected by later generations. At the heart of Suleiman's approach was the recognition that power must be legitimate. Conquest could secure territory, but only law could sustain it. By codifying rules, clarifying justice, and balancing religious and secular authority, he strengthened the bond between ruler and ruled. The title of Kanuni, the Lawgiver, was not lightly earned. It reflected the deep imprint of his reforms on the empire's daily life. We can imagine the atmosphere of Istanbul in these years. Scribes bent over parchment, recording decrees in elegant script, judges deliberating in provincial courts, their decisions echoing the principles set in the capital. Markets alive, with merchants who trusted that disputes could be fairly settled. Peasants sowing and harvesting under systems that, though demanding, promised some stability. Through such scenes, the abstract idea of law became a tangible part of everyday existence. As we let this chapter settle in our minds, we see Suleiman not on the battlefield, but in the council chamber, not with sword in hand, but with scrolls and decrees. His greatness lay not only in the territories he conquered, but in the structures he built to hold them together. This was the quiet power of law, the invisible threads that wove together cities, villages, and peoples into one imperial fabric. In the stillness of this reflection, we sense how law, like the soft rhythm of breathing, underlies the empire's life. It may not always be visible, but it is constant, essential, and sustaining. And as we drift toward rest, we carry with us the image of Suleiman as the lawgiver, presiding over a realm where justice sought to balance the needs of the many with the authority of the one. As Suleiman's legal reforms strengthened the empire's foundations, his vision also rose upward into the skyline, expressed in the stones, domes, and courtyards of Istanbul. His reign is often called the golden age of Ottoman architecture and cultural splendor, and nowhere is this more evident than in the city that had once been Byzantium and Constantinople, but now pulsed as the heart of the Ottoman world. To walk through Istanbul in Suleiman's time is to move through a city transformed by ambition and artistry, where stone and marble gave shape to the empire's sense of itself. At the center of this flowering stood the great architect Mimar Sinan, whose career unfolded under Suleiman's patronage. Sinan, originally trained as a military engineer, rose to become chief architect of the empire and left behind a legacy that reshaped Istanbul and many provincial cities. His designs combined structural genius with aesthetic grace, blending Byzantine influences, Islamic traditions, and his own innovations into a distinctive Ottoman style. The partnership of Suleiman and Sinan produced monuments that still define the city's skyline. Foremost among these is the Süleymaniye Mosque, commissioned by Suleiman in the 1550s. Rising on a hill that overlooks the Golden Horn, it stands as a serene yet commanding presence, its domes and minarets seemingly floating above the city. The mosque is not only a place of worship, but also a complex of social and cultural institutions, including a hospital, schools, kitchens for the poor, and baths. This reflects the Ottoman concept of a külliye, a mosque-centered complex that served as a hub of community life. For the people of Istanbul, the Süleymaniye was both a spiritual sanctuary and a symbol of imperial generosity. The interior of the mosque reveals a harmony of light, space, and decoration. Sunlight streams through stained glass windows, illuminating calligraphy that praises God and honors the Prophet Muhammad. The vast dome, supported by graceful arches, creates a sense of openness and tranquility. To enter such a space was, and still is, to feel lifted beyond the concerns of daily life, embraced by beauty and proportion. But the splendor of Istanbul in Suleiman's era was not limited to mosques. Palaces, schools, bridges, and fountains spread across the city. Topkapi Palace, the imperial residence, expanded with new courtyards, pavilions, and gardens. Its location overlooking the Bosporus offered sweeping views of the straits where ships passed endlessly between seas, a reminder of the empire's place at the center of global trade. Within its walls, artisans decorated chambers with tiles of blue and turquoise, patterns that seemed to echo the rhythm of waves. Markets and bazaars also flourished. The Grand Bazaar, though begun earlier, grew into a sprawling labyrinth of shops where merchants from across the empire displayed silks, spices, ceramics, and jewels. The air was alive with the scent of coffee, which became increasingly popular during Suleiman's reign, and with the hum of voices in many languages. Istanbul became not only a political capital, but also a cultural crossroads, where East met West in goods, ideas, and styles. Suleiman's patronage extended beyond architecture into literature, music, and the decorative arts. Poetry thrived at his court, and Suleiman himself was a poet, writing under the pen name Muhibi, meaning the lover. His verses reveal a contemplative spirit, exploring themes of love, faith, and the fleeting nature of power. One of his most quoted lines reminds us, "The most precious wealth is health, and the most noble possession is contentment." In these words, we glimpse the softer dimensions of a ruler often remembered for conquest. The visual arts also reached new heights. Ottoman calligraphers perfected the elegant scripts that adorned manuscripts and mosque walls, turning the written word into visual devotion. Ceramics from Iznik workshops, with their vivid cobalt blues and floral designs, became prized across the empire and beyond. Textiles, too, displayed intricate patterns, weaving silk and gold into garments that expressed both refinement and imperial pride. In this period, Istanbul became a city of gardens as well as stone. Along the Bosporus and within palace walls, cypress trees, roses, and tulips were cultivated. The tulip, in particular, emerged as a favored flower, its delicate form symbolizing both beauty and refinement. Gardens were places of reflection, where courtiers recited poetry and musicians played gentle melodies. In these spaces, the empire's grandeur softened into tranquility, offering balance to the demands of politics and war. This splendor was not created for the elite alone. Through charitable foundations, funded by endowments called Waqf, Suleiman ensured that ordinary people benefited from the empire's prosperity. Public kitchens provided food for the poor, schools educated children, and fountains offered water to travelers. In this way, the architecture and culture of the age became not only symbols of imperial greatness, but also instruments of social welfare. We might imagine at twilight the silhouette of the Süleymaniye Mosque against the setting sun, its domes glowing softly as lamps are lit within. The call to prayer rises, mingling with the voices of merchants closing their stalls, with the laughter of children in courtyards, with the quiet flow of water in fountains. In such moments, Suleiman's Istanbul was not simply a capital. It was a living testament to the harmony of power and beauty, of faith and daily life. As we let this chapter rest, we feel how architecture and culture embody the soul of an empire. Suleiman's vision was not only to conquer with armies, but to inspire with beauty, to leave behind monuments that continue to whisper of his age. In their stillness, domes and tiles, verses and melodies invite us to pause, to breathe, and to drift into the timeless rhythm of history. Beyond the domes and marble courtyards of Istanbul, the heart of Suleiman's empire beat within the palace. To understand his reign fully, we must step quietly into the inner world of Topkapi, where politics intertwined with private life, and where family, advisors, and the harem shaped decisions that reached across continents. In this sphere, Suleiman's image as a warrior and lawgiver gave way to the softer rhythms of companionship, intrigue, and devotion. Topkapi Palace was more than a royal residence. It was the nerve center of the Ottoman state, a sprawling complex of courtyards, pavilions, gardens, and chambers overlooking the Bosporus. The outer courtyards buzzed with administrators, scribes, guards, and petitioners. As one passed inward, the atmosphere grew more secluded and refined, culminating in the inner sanctum known as the harem. Here lived the Sultan's family, his concubines, and his children, overseen by the Queen Mother, the Valid Sultan. The harem has often been misunderstood in European imagination, painted as a place of indulgence or mystery. In truth, it was a carefully ordered household and a powerful political institution. Women of the harem could wield significant influence, particularly those closest to the Sultan. In Suleiman's reign, this influence crystallized around one remarkable woman, Hürrem Sultan, known in Europe as Roxolana. Hürrem's story is as extraordinary as Suleiman's own. Born in what is now Ukraine, she was captured in a raid and brought through the slave markets to the Ottoman court. Yet her intelligence, charm, and strong will elevated her from concubine to Suleiman's most trusted companion. Breaking with tradition, Suleiman married her, a rare honor that elevated her status and gave her a role unprecedented for a sultana. Hürrem was more than a partner in private life. She became a political actor in her own right. She corresponded with foreign rulers, influenced court appointments, and patronized charitable foundations. Together, she and Suleiman formed a partnership that blended love with governance. Their bond is reflected in the poetry Suleiman wrote, often dedicated to her, where he described her as his confidant and solace. In this union, the empire's vast responsibilities were intertwined with a deeply personal companionship. The influence of the harem extended into succession politics. Sons born to different mothers often vied for position, and rivalries could turn deadly. Hürrem worked to secure the future of her children, guiding Suleiman's favor toward them. This altered the traditional balance of power within the dynasty, shifting influence from concubines who bore heirs to a more centralized role for the sultana. The age of Suleiman and Hürrem marked the beginning of what later historians called the Sultanate of Women, when imperial consorts and mothers played prominent roles in state affairs. Life in the palace was not only about intrigue, it was also a world of ceremony, refinement, and daily routine. Court rituals reinforced Suleiman's authority, with processions, audiences, and feasts conducted in carefully choreographed order. Music filled the halls, with instruments such as the oud and ney, creating melodies that blended Persian, Turkish, and Arabic traditions. Poets recited verses in gardens shaded by cypress and perfumed by roses. The palace was both a place of governance and a cultural workshop, where art and politics intertwined. The Grand Vizier, the Sultan's chief minister, played a crucial role in bridging the private world of the palace and the public demands of the empire. Among Suleiman's viziers, none was more influential than Ibrahim Pasha, a close friend from his youth. Their bond was strong, and Suleiman entrusted him with immense authority, granting him titles, wealth, and command over armies. For years, Ibrahim Pasha was the second most powerful man in the empire, shaping campaigns and policies. Yet in time, political rivalries and suspicions arose, and he was executed by Suleiman's order. This event reminds us that even in the intimacy of friendship, the shadow of absolute power loomed. The daily rhythms of Topkapi reflected both grandeur and simplicity. Meals might be shared from copper trays, with dishes of rice, lamb, and vegetables flavored with spices brought from across the empire. Water from ornate fountains refreshed courtiers, while the call to prayer structured the day. The palace was a place of stillness, punctuated by ceremony, where the smallest gesture carried meaning. To walk its courtyards was to sense both serenity and tension, for beneath its beauty lay the constant undercurrent of politics and succession. Suleiman's private world reveals a ruler not only of armies and laws, but of relationships and emotions. His poetry, his devotion to Hurrem, and his reliance on trusted advisors show us the human dimension of empire. The palace was a microcosm of the empire itself, diverse, intricate, and alive with competing voices. As we close this chapter, let us picture Suleiman in the quiet of Topkapi's gardens. Perhaps he walks with Hurrem at his side, the two speaking softly as the Bosporus glimmers beyond the walls. Perhaps he listens to a poet recite verses under the stars, or reflects alone on the burdens of rule. In these moments, the magnificent becomes simply Suleiman, a man of feeling as well as power. And as we drift into rest, we carry the image of a palace both splendid and intimate, a place where the destinies of empires were decided not only by armies and laws, but by the quiet conversations of hearts within gilded chambers. If the palace was the nerve center of Suleiman's empire, then the daily lives of ordinary people were its lifeblood. To understand the Ottoman world fully, we must step beyond the walls of Istanbul and wander through villages, markets, and towns where farmers, merchants, artisans, and travelers carried out their routines. These men and women seldom appear in chronicles of battles and decrees, yet their quiet persistence sustained the empire. The Ottoman lands stretched across a vast geography, and daily life varied with climate and region. In Anatolia, peasants plowed fields of wheat and barley, their work shaped by the rhythm of seasons. In the Balkans, vineyards and olive groves spread across rolling hills. In Egypt, the Nile's floods nourished fertile fields of grain and sugarcane. Though diverse in detail, all regions shared the same agricultural foundation. The soil and the cycle of planting and harvest bound families to the land. Peasants, who formed the majority of the population, lived in modest villages of mud brick or stone. Houses were simple, often with a hearth for cooking and a courtyard where animals were kept. Families rose with the dawn, working long days in fields under the sun. Their obligations included taxes and tithes, paid either in produce or coin, collected by local officials on behalf of the state. Suleiman's legal reforms, designed to standardize taxation, touched these villages directly. Though burdens remained heavy, the predictability of rules helped many to endure. Markets animated the lives of these communities. Weekly bazaars drew farmers and artisans together, creating spaces of trade and exchange. Merchants sold grains, fruits, and textiles, while craftsmen offered tools, pottery, and clothing. The clamor of bargaining filled the air, mingled with the sense of spices, grilled meats, and freshly baked bread. These markets were not only economic centers, but also social gatherings, where news was shared, songs were sung, and marriages were arranged. Cities, by contrast, thrived as bustling hubs of commerce and culture. In Damascus, Cairo, Aleppo, and Bursa, caravans arrived laden with goods from distant lands. The Silk Road and maritime routes connected the empire to China, India, and Africa. Traders brought silks, spices, ivory, and jewels, while exporting textiles, ceramics, and grain. Inns and caravanserais lined trade routes, offering shelter and food for weary travelers. At night, the courtyards of these inns echoed with conversations in Turkish, Arabic, Greek, Persian, and countless other tongues. Religious life shaped the rhythms of each day. Mosques called the faithful to prayer 5 times daily, and Friday sermons reminded communities of their connection to the wider empire. But religion was not confined to Islam alone. Christians and Jews living under the millet system maintained their own churches and synagogues, their own schools and laws. In some towns, the ringing of church bells mingled with the muezzin's call, a reminder of the empire's diversity. Tolerance did not erase hierarchy. Muslims held the privileged position, but it allowed coexistence across centuries. Crafts and guilds gave structure to urban economies. Artisans organized themselves into guilds that regulated training, quality, and prices. A young apprentice would spend years learning from a master, eventually becoming a journeyman, and with time, a master himself. Carpentry, metalwork, weaving, and pottery were not only livelihoods, but also arts, producing objects of utility and beauty. Tiles from Iznik, carpets from Anatolia, and textiles from Bursa carried Ottoman artistry into homes both humble and grand. Food offered another window into daily life. Meals were simple for peasants, bread, cheese, lentils, and vegetables, but richer for city dwellers and elites, with lamb stews, rice dishes, and sweets flavored with honey and rosewater. Coffee, introduced in the 16th century, spread rapidly through Ottoman cities, with coffee houses becoming centers of conversation, debate, and leisure. In these establishments, men gathered to talk politics, recite poetry, or play backgammon, their cups of strong, dark brew linking them to a new cultural ritual. The role of women in daily life was shaped by family, community, and tradition. In rural areas, women worked alongside men in fields, tended to children, and managed households. In cities, some engaged in crafts, trade, or service. Elite women, particularly in Istanbul, could wield influence through charitable endowments, funding fountains, schools, and mosques. Though bound by patriarchal norms, women's contributions were essential in both public and private spheres. Education and scholarship, too, reached beyond the palace. Madrasas, attached to mosques, trained students in theology, law, and literature. In villages, children learned to read the Quran, while in cities, higher learning flourished. Scholars traveled between courts, sharing knowledge across languages and disciplines. In Suleiman's reign, intellectual exchange was vibrant, enriched by the empire's position at the meeting point of civilizations. For all their diversity, the people of the empire shared a sense of connection to the Sultan. His decrees, inscribed on parchment in Istanbul, reached even the remotest provinces, shaping the taxes they paid, the officials they obeyed, and the justice they sought. Though most would never see Suleiman in person, they felt his presence in the order of their lives. As we let this chapter settle, we picture the ordinary moments that gave texture to the empire. A farmer guiding an ox through a field, a merchant arranging fabrics in a stall, a child reciting verses by lamplight, a pilgrim pausing at a fountain before continuing his journey. These small acts, repeated endlessly across the empire, sustained its greatness as surely as armies and palaces did. In the stillness of these reflections, we recognize that the empire was not only the story of rulers, but also of countless lives lived quietly under their shadow. And as we drift into rest, we hold these images gently, allowing the rhythms of daily labor, prayer, and conversation to carry us into the calm landscapes of history. As we come to the closing chapter of Suleiman's life and reign, we enter a space where power and mortality converge. His story, so full of conquest, law, and splendor, is also a story of aging, of loss, and of the enduring legacy that outlived him. To reflect on his final years is to see the empire not in its rising vigor, but in its maturity, facing the inevitable passing of its greatest ruler. Suleiman ruled for nearly half a century, from 1520 to 1566, and in those decades he transformed the Ottoman Empire into a dominant power of the early modern world. Yet by the 1560s, the man once full of youthful ambition was now an elder statesman. Age brought with it both wisdom and burdens. His long reign had seen triumphs in Hungary, Baghdad, and the Mediterranean, but also personal sorrows and political challenges that weighed heavily on him. One of the most profound shifts in his later years was the loss of Hürrem Sultan, his beloved wife and confidante, who died in 1558. Their partnership had been central to his private world, shaping not only his household, but also the politics of succession and influence. Without her presence, Suleiman carried the responsibilities of rule with a heavier solitude. His poetry after her passing speaks of longing, grief, and reflection, revealing a man deeply touched by love and loss. The question of succession also cast a shadow over his later reign. Rivalries among his sons led to bitter conflicts, fueled in part by the intrigues of the court and the pressures of dynastic politics. In 1553, Suleiman faced the painful decision to order the execution of his eldest son, Mustafa, accused of plotting rebellion. The event shocked the empire and haunted Suleiman's memory. Later, his surviving sons, Selim and Bayezid, struggled for dominance, with Selim ultimately emerging as heir. These episodes remind us that even the most powerful ruler could not escape the turmoil of family strife. Yet Suleiman's sense of duty did not diminish. Even into his 70s, he continued to lead campaigns, determined to embody the image of the warrior sultan. His final military expedition was directed once again toward Hungary, where the long struggle against Habsburg forces continued. In 1566, he set out for Sigetvar, a fortress defended by a determined Croatian nobleman, Nikola Zrinski. Despite his advanced age and frail health, Suleiman accompanied his army, unwilling to let decline keep him from the field. It was during this campaign that Suleiman's long life reached its end. On September 6, 1566, in his tent near Sigetvar, he died quietly, far from the palaces of Istanbul. His death was kept secret for days so that the army might not falter in its resolve. The fortress eventually fell, but the Sultan, who had led the empire through its golden age, did not live to see its capture. He was 72 years old. The legacy he left behind was immense. Under his rule, the Ottoman Empire reached its greatest territorial extent, stretching from Hungary to the Persian Gulf, from the shores of North Africa to the gates of Vienna. More than land, however, he left behind institutions, laws, and monuments that endured for centuries. The Süleymaniye Mosque still crowns Istanbul's skyline, its domes a reminder of the age of magnificence. His legal reforms continued to guide governance long after his passing. His reputation as both magnificent and lawgiver lived on in the memory of subjects and historians alike. To his contemporaries, Suleiman was a figure of awe. European rulers, from Francis I of France to Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire, regarded him as a peer, sometimes an ally, often a rival. To his subjects, he was a symbol of justice and prosperity, the sovereign under whom the empire flourished. Later generations would look back on his reign as the pinnacle of Ottoman strength and cultural brilliance. And yet, even as we admire his achievements, we see the fragile humanity within them. He grieved the loss of loved ones, struggled with family conflicts, and faced the limits of aging. His life reminds us that history's great figures are not immune to the same currents of joy and sorrow that shape us all. The empire after Suleiman would continue, strong but facing new challenges. His son Selim II, known as Selim the Sot for his love of wine, inherited the throne, and under him, the empire began to shift from expansion to consolidation. While later rulers maintained the empire's strength, none quite matched the combination of vision, energy, and balance that Suleiman embodied. His reign became the standard by which later sultans were measured, a golden age etched in memory. As we rest in this closing reflection, let us imagine Suleiman's funeral procession in Istanbul. Crowds gather as his body is brought to the Süleymaniye Mosque, the monument he had built in life and which would now hold him in death. The call to prayer echoes over the city, mingling with the sobs of mourners and the whispers of prayers. The Bosporus flows quietly nearby, carrying ships laden with goods, while above, the domes and minarets stand silhouetted against the sky. In this moment, an era ends, but its echoes endure. Suleiman's story is not simply one of conquests and laws, but of the weaving together of diverse peoples, the balancing of power with justice, and the creation of beauty that outlasts the man himself. His reign invites us to see history not as distant grandeur, but as a tapestry of human endeavor, fragile yet enduring, majestic yet tender. And so, as we let this chapter close, we allow the rhythms of Suleiman's life to guide us gently toward rest. The empire he shaped continues in memory, its domes and verses, its laws and gardens, whispering across time. In these whispers, we find the calm assurance that history, like sleep, carries us onward, cradling us in its quiet embrace.